Hello, I'm Amanda Moore. I'm the director of the Clearinghouse community. Welcome to our Shriver Hangout for April 2016. This is our monthly conversation with advocates who are advancing change. Now, both the Hangouts and the Clearinghouse community are brought to you by the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, a national leader advancing justice and opportunity. And I'm very happy today to have with me three such advocates who are advancing change. They're all from Legal Aid of Arkansas, and we'll go ahead and let them say hello. We'll start with Lee Richardson. He's the executive director.
Hello.
And Lee's joining us. Hi, Lee. He's joining us from Jonesboro, Arkansas. And we have Kevin de Liban, who is the leader of the Economic Justice Workgroup at Legal Aid of Arkansas. He's joining us today from Memphis. Normally he's in the West Memphis office. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Hi.
And we also have Jason Auer, who's the leader of the Housing Workgroup at Legal Aid of Arkansas, and he's joining us from Little Rock. Hey, Jason.
Hi, Amanda.
Now, these three are the authors of our newest Clearinghouse article. That article is called Alchemizing Volume. That's what we're going to talk about today. If you would like to find that article, if you haven't read it already, you can do so at the web address that's on your screen. That's at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. I'll remind everyone that after this session, you will get an email that will have a link to a recording of today's conversation and a link to that article. So you'll be able to find that later as well. Now, before we get started on our conversation, I want to tell you how you can be part of the conversation. That's why we do this. We want to put you in touch with these leaders because they're here to share what they've been doing and talk to you about what you're doing. So there are a couple ways that you can participate today. If you're watching us through Google itself, through Google+, there's something called a Q&A app, and you can find that. Most of you will be able to find it. Sometimes it's not available on your system, but you can look if you hover over the left side of your screen, and there will be a row of icons. One of those should be blue and say Q&A in it. And if you click that, you'll have a chat box open up on the right side of your screen, and that's how you can send us questions. Don't worry, your face won't appear. We won't hear you, but we'll see your words. If you want to go ahead now and try that out, feel free. You can just send us your name and where you're watching. Go ahead and get that channel working. Now, I know a lot of you are also watching us through the live stream on the Shriver Center's YouTube channel. We want to hear from you too. You can send me an email, and I'll monitor that during the broadcast. My email address is on your screen. It is Amanda Moore, M-O-O-R-E, at povertylaw.org. So be sure we hear from you. Now let's jump into why we're here. We want to talk about the really exciting stuff that's going on in Arkansas. And as a native of Kentucky, I know that it's a real treat sometimes when you can say, here's something really great going on in my state. And I feel like Arkansas is probably a similar situation. So let's talk about the good stuff going on in Arkansas. You use this alchemy metaphor in your article, which is really great. So it's this idea of taking something that's maybe pretty commonplace and maybe not so precious, which you define as sort of a high-volume legal services practice. And then through some sort of magical mystery, we end up with a really precious thing, which you have defined as a practice that has a broad impact for your clients. And so let's talk about that and about how you made that magical mystery process happen. Lee, I'll start with you, and if you could just sort of briefly paint for us the situation, what you had previously, and where you wanted to be.
Okay, well, I came to work at Legal Aid of Arkansas in 1991, and we had a traditional legal services model that's been around forever, where we had offices spread throughout a rural service area, probably 20,700 square miles, and each office was more autonomous. Everyone was a generalist. And probably 70% of the work we were doing year in, year out ended up being family law, which was important work, but we weren't moving the bar much for our client communities as a whole. So we were determined, starting probably in about 2008, to try to change the way we're doing business. We really had never had a strategic plan that was meaningful in any way, that had any thought process that went into it. Every year we just rehashed the priorities, possibly made some minor changes and move forward. And after 20 years of working here, I couldn't see that we were making a impact on the communities we serve. We were making impact on the individual lives, but not the way we wanted to do it. So that's where it all started.
Well, I think that's a concern that is widely shared just based on the broad response we've had to your article and to this hangout from all over the country. So in the article, you talk about how it started with your strategic planning process in 2010, and then you started implementing what you had planned. Can you tell us what you specifically did to make this change happen?
Yeah, I probably should lay a little more background. I want to give the Legal Services Corporation some credit for this, because they come and they do Office of Program Performance visits, and they do some very good, at least from time to time, very good grant assurance requests as a result of those visits. And then that allows someone like me to help move the entire board and the organization, all of us together, in a different direction, because they've given us these helpful directives, lack of a better term. So first thing we did was we set up some legal work supervision standards and legal work standards. We moved forward from that to bring in a couple of consultants to talk about being more deliberate, more thoughtful, more mindful about the way we use the precious resources we have. We determined that the world's never going to give us enough money to do what they're asking us to do. So that's where we finally came to the idea that upstream work, we've heard about upstream work for years, we really haven't started doing that. Let's come up with a way to do that in a rural setting and a way to engage everyone. So I could go on and on about how we changed into a work group model from a traditional model, how we changed our helpline to include every staff member works on the helpline. Therefore, there's no disconnect between the helpline and the substantive law work groups, because the substantive law work groups all work on the helpline and they're fully engaged and they know exactly what's going on. A very good model. I don't think we'd trade it for anything. There was a little skepticism on the front, but after 5 years, we're seeing significant impact litigation going on in Arkansas that we had never, well, we probably had seen before, but we hadn't seen since the late 80s, early 90s.
Right, well, and I want to talk about a couple of those specifically. First, I want to say hello to some people who have let us know they're watching. Hi to Kara in my home state of Kentucky. It's great to have you here with us. And hello to Shelby in my current state of Tennessee. Great to have you with us. And Quincy in Arkansas, and Lee in Alaska. So we've got folks from all over watching and letting us know they're out there. So it's great to have you and all the rest of you too. So now let's talk about specifically some of this. You say you put the work groups in place. You've put every staff working on the intake line at some point, and then in 2015 you really started to see some results from this, and this is what your article is about. Some results in particularly in Medicaid and in housing, and I want to talk about each of those a little bit. Kevin, we'll start with you on the Medicaid advocacy. Could you tell us briefly what happened there? What was the broad problem that you saw, and what did you do to make a big change there?
Fortunately, Arkansas was one of only two southern states, your home state of Kentucky included, to expand Medicaid, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing. The flip side of it is that I don't think the state's DHS, our Human Services Department, was prepared to deal with what that meant administratively. And so we had just widespread problems with processing delays. This was particularly problematic for people with chronic conditions or people who are pregnant, who were waiting 3, 6, 9 months to get approved for Medicaid and being in limbo until then. So we heard about that. That was essentially the problem. And then we had to figure out ways within our capacity and resources to address that in some sort of meaningful way.
And so tell us a little bit about so that lays out the problem for us. So what did you do? How did you approach a problem that was so big?
So first we took the size of the problem and actually used that to our advantage. So this is where the volume and the alchemy comes in. Is we knew this problem was widespread. Of course, we can't do a class action. There were some states out there like California who had great organizational plaintiffs and some other background that we just didn't have in Arkansas. But what we did have is numbers. And we thought, well, wait, individual fair hearing requests aren't going to make much of a difference. The agency will treat them as just individual occurrences. So what if we could package a whole ton of fair hearing requests into a short time span and then just put it gently in the lap of DHS? And so that's what we did, is we basically built, thanks in large part to our helpline model, a shadow Medicaid helpline where in a 2-week span we got 1,000% of the calls we ordinarily would get. We got over 110 calls about Medicaid, and within a couple weeks after that we had made, I think it was 50 fair hearing requests between ourselves and our sister organization in the state. And that started the process of addressing this at the state level.
And so what happened from there? What success did you see?
I mean, one, everybody was getting approved for Medicaid within a week or two of our fair hearing requests. And they were so numerous that the agency actually asked us to put some additional information on our request to make it easier for them to process. We took all that data. First, we tried to get data from the state about how big the problem was. They said they couldn't generate it. We took the data that we had into a meeting with high-level DHS officials, with some other advocates in the state, and we're able to point out to them, hey, look, in this period we've gotten, this many calls. Here's the amount of uncompensated out-of-pocket expenses they've incurred. Here's why this is important. DHS, the officials were receptive but didn't really acknowledge much of the problem, and that led us into FOIA requests and information battles and ongoing fair hearing requests, ultimately culminating in federal litigation for one subset of that issue, for one client that was having problems. And I'm proud of that because that's the first federal Medicaid litigation that's come from the consumer side in Arkansas, I think, in a couple decades. And that was helped significantly by, of course, our team here at Legal Aid, and then also the folks at NHELP and the folks in the Southeast Public Benefits Task Force and Advocacy Group, SETAG, who've all provided a lot of mentorship and technical assistance.
Well, it's a great example of the change that can come from what you're doing. Jason, I'll turn to you now and the housing work that was going on there. So I know you picked a particular issue. It's Arkansas has a reputation. There's been press about how it's the worst state for tenants, period. So that's a pretty big problem to face, first of all. So what specific issue did you decide to tackle, and what did you do?
Well, Arkansas is a very unbalanced state for landlord-tenant law. Among some of the unfair practices that go on in Arkansas is the only state that criminalizes the eviction procedure. And the way that works is tenants are given a citation if they fail to pay rent, and they're going to have to go to criminal court where they are on the hook for up to 90 days in jail and up to a $1,000 fine for missing a month's rent payment. So this has been going on in Arkansas since 1901, really, but it really the jail provisions were added in 2001, and it's long been a goal of legal services to try to do something about this law because it works very, very unfairly to tenants. It's very coercive. A lot of tenants just get the notice saying that they may be prosecuted, and then they leave at that point, and they never get the opportunity to assert any claims they may have. So it's something we clearly wanted to do something about. Arkansas has a civil eviction law that's fairly fair, but it wasn't being used heavily because there was also this criminal procedure, which the landlords loved because, for one, they didn't have to hire an attorney, and for another thing, it worked really quickly. They didn't have to go to court. They didn't have to be bothered with it. The prosecutors took care of all the work, and the taxpayers paid the bill. So the first thing we did to try to work on this law, which the constitutionality of the law had been challenged before in the late 1980s. That was before they added some of the amendments to the statute that made it even more unconstitutional. But we decided we were going to bring a constitutional challenge to this failure to vacate law. First thing we did was we started building a coalition. We had extensive meetings with our sister legal aid organization that operates in the southern half of the state and got all the legal aid attorneys on the same page. We also began working with the ACLU out of New York, and they were extremely helpful in helping us put pleadings together and put a litigation strategy together. Really can't thank them enough. So the way we did it was we represented people who had been charged with this crime. We filed motions on their behalf, and we got several successful rulings in the circuit court, which is the county level court in Arkansas, declaring the law unconstitutional. Before we really began our work, the Bowen School of Law had done a survey of the different district and municipal courts that use the law and found 2,000 to 3,000 prosecutions per year under this law. And after our work, we've got it ruled unconstitutional in I think 11 counties now in Arkansas, including Pulaski County, which is where Little Rock is. Is the most populous county in Arkansas, and a couple of the other more populous counties too. So we figure we've knocked out 50 to 60% of the prosecution so far. Of course, we're still working on it any chance we get.
Sure. Well, that's another great example. So let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts of this, because that's usually what our viewers want to know. Is like, this is fantastic work. We would like to replicate this if we could. Before we jump into that, I want to say hi to a few more people who've let us know that they are watching. Kamisha's in Oklahoma, Lewis is in D.C., and Sarah is in Maryland. So thanks for letting us hear from you. We would love to hear from the rest of you too with your questions or comments. Have you done something in your practice that has helped make this magic happen from high volume into something of more of a broad impact? You can send an email to me at Amanda Moore, MOORE, at povertylaw.org, or if you're in Google+, use the Q&A app to send us a question. So we did have one such question come in, and this is from Haiti, and he asks, you mentioned that all staff work on the helpline. What are the specifics? How many hours per week, and is it for a limited period of time?
I can answer that. I believe the helpline is open 18 hours a week, and every staff member has at least 1 2-hour shift. The work groups each have substantive queues, so all 4 work groups have at least 1 person working on the helpline anytime the helpline is open. So every attorney has at least one shift, and it's usually 2 hours. And then we also have a more senior attorney that's the advocate of the day that reviews all the cases that come in that day in each specific helpline queue. It works real well. There's been no pushback. There might have been pushback if we tried to say, okay, these people have to work, but these people have an exemption for whatever reason. But when it's all hands on deck, there's nobody around to complain. And I believe at the start there may have been some skepticism, but at this point I don't think there's a better helpline in the country.
Okay, so your 4 work groups are, so you've got housing and economic justice, and what were the other
consumer and domestic violence.
Got it. And Katie just let us know she's watching from Kansas City. Hi, Katie. Thanks for joining us. So I'll ask sort of a broader question beyond just the helpline. So if other legal services programs are interested in making this sort of change, what would you say they should do to start such a transition? Where do they begin?
Well, the technology is obviously a very important factor. It's not new technology, but if you don't have a VoIP phone system and don't have a cloud case management system, you're not going to be able to pull this off. If you're still working with some kind of analog phone system with all the helpline workers sitting in one area of one office in one part of your service area, we have people working from 7 offices every day on the helpline, and everyone doing it. So having the technology in place is one thing, and you've got to combat orthodoxy and complacency every day. That's the biggest enemy of any public interest law firm, I believe, with technology being so fluid and the law being so fluid. If you have orthodoxy and complacency in your organization, you're just going to fall further and further behind.
I think that's a really great statement. I feel like that should be carved in stone somewhere. So I'll talk to Kevin and Jason about this now. So your 2 work groups really went through this transition differently, with one of them sort of being a little more, I guess, with a little more intentional about shifting the focus to something, and the other one, it just sort of, there came a time and it was go time. And so want to ask you about that, about what lessons you can share about how you can plan for such a transition, and how you handle the volume that you had before if you get sort of caught with that when you're in the middle of trying to focus on impact cases instead. And Kevin, I'll start with you.
Well, Jason had the intentional shift. So in my work group, some of it's due to staff turnover and having newer attorneys. Some of it's just due to institutional practice. But we've traditionally been between 60 and 80 cases all the time, and that's a mix of disability, employment law, unemployment, traditional public benefits, and education. So we cover a wide area, and that's a lot to know. But basically, when this happened, there wasn't much choice but to work more. So an insane amount of hard work and long hours, and you just have to plan it and know that it's ultimately valuable. Great teamwork, and I can't thank my team, the Economic Justice Work Group, enough. So if I was busy working on that federal litigation and I was the only one, somebody else was covering my helpline shift sometimes, or somebody else was reviewing cases, somebody else was covering a court date, these other things. So hard work, teamwork, and then also a goal in mind. So it takes a ton of energy, and it's kind of bad for you emotionally and for your life. But it also inspired me to get to what we're now calling the 40 case era. So now everybody in my work group is at, give or take, 40 cases, which is going to free us up to do much more of the impact work and change the way that we approach some of the cases that hasn't been sort of institutionally present in the past.
All right, Jason, we'll turn to you now. So how did you, since you had the more intentional shift, how did you plan for that?
Well, it was really easy in the housing realm, so I probably get a little more credit than I deserve. We had a few very big goals that we wanted to accomplish, and they weren't difficult to pinpoint because we could basically say, what does Arkansas do that's bad that no other state does? And there are a couple of those things. One was the criminal eviction. The other is that Arkansas is the only state that still embraces caveat lessee and doesn't imply a warranty of habitability into rental contracts. So our goals were easy for us to identify, and then it just became a function of how do we want to get there? How do we want to set ourselves up to be able to handle lawsuits that might address those issues? And so we were able, fortunately, I think, in my work group, a little easier than in Kevin's work group, to cut some stuff out to free our attorneys up. For instance, we stopped doing basically any type of estate planning. We didn't have a ton of expertise in that area anyway, so we were able to cut a lot of that out. Easement cases were another one. They're very important sometimes for some individuals. If someone puts a fence up across their road, but it wasn't in fact impacting the client community as a whole in any meaningful way. So, we really tried to make a shift away from those types of individual cases and to put those resources into our campaign, to try to help with the warranty of habitability and also criminal eviction.
Well, we've had a couple of questions come in. We also had a hello from Chet in Maine. So hi, Chet. One question we had come in from Dennis, which is, what is the daily call volume for the helpline?
I'll let one of you that actually work on the helpline take a shot at that.
Well, I think that depends on what work group you're in, honestly. I know we're on in 2-hour shifts. In housing, we only have one advocate on at a time, and I could get anywhere from 2 calls to 7 or 8 calls in my 2-hour shift, but that's just on housing. There are also 3 other people that are going to be sitting on the helpline, and I know our family law helpline person is getting a much higher call volume than I am, and to some extent probably our consumer person too.
Okay, another question. Thanks, Dennis, for that great question. Salma sent us a question. This one, Kevin, will be for you. This is about your Medicaid extravaganza. She's curious about how you were able to get the word out about the helpline.
This is great. We have very good relationships with our the Navigator network. Part of that's through our medical legal partnerships with community health centers. The community health centers, of course, are kind of the front line in this, and so our medical legal partnerships were able to tell us, hey, this is a problem, and get the word out. We also have on staff Casey Jasinski, who's both a navigator and attorney, so she's linked into the navigator network. And then we have other good community relationships. So if you're founded in the community, you can spread the word out that way, and that's really what we did to get everyone to know that in this 2-week span, please call this number, and we'll be able to address your issue.
We have another helpline question, and I'm not sure if this is about the intake line or the Medicaid line, but Dolores from Illinois wanted to know basically what the relationship is with the other legal aid program in Arkansas, and how are you both on? I guess we could answer for both. I know for the Medicaid extravaganza, it was a team effort. What about your intake line? Is that a statewide or program-wide?
We have a statewide phone number that anyone can call in the state, and it has geo-routing. Depending on where you're calling from, it hits the correct legal aid program, but the helpline is unique then to each individual program. The Center for Arkansas Legal Services has a great helpline, but it's more of a traditional helpline where they have 2 or 3 dedicated helpline attorneys and 2 or 3 dedicated intake workers, and that's who handles all the call volume, whereas we have 26 attorneys rotating through and 6 or 8 paralegals, and they are completely separate at that point, but we do share a statewide phone number to make it easier on clients.
Okay, and Kevin, in the Medicaid, it was when you had your specific Medicaid hotline set up.
So we dealt with all of the calls for all of the state for that 2-week extravaganza, for that separate Medicaid line. And we had worked with our sister organization to make sure that our referrals could be streamlined so that they get the information, could put it in their case management system, and then run with the case.
Okay. Lee, you may have just answered this question indirectly, but I'll ask it directly. How many, this comes from Jeremy in Virginia, how many individuals are in each work group?
Each work group has 6 to 8 individuals. We have 44 people on staff probably, so each group will have 6 to 8 people. At least 4 of them will be attorneys. Sometimes they may be AmeriCorps attorneys that are, or Equal Justice Works fellows or someone of that nature. And then the Economic Justice group may be relying a bit more upon paralegals, where the other work groups can't do that, although there's paralegals in each work group.
Kevin, I'll throw the last question to you. Although your volume started to fade out a little bit with your last question, so hopefully we don't have a technical problem. We'll see. Let's say another program does make this transition. Do you have tips for them on how to make sure that it sticks and it's not just a temporary shift?
Yeah, certainly. It's a few things, I think, is you've got to get rid of the magical thinking that makes you think this isn't the time. Right? We'd always had this promise of a future time when impact was going to be possible. Get rid of that magical thinking. You go, no, it's on us now with whatever smarts, talents, and capabilities we have. And you start then to disavow the other things that keep you from focusing on impact and institutionalize it. So you've got to make sure you take your lessons that you've learned. Recognize, look, those 80 cases I had and I closed 10 of them just because I didn't pay attention. I'm not doing those 10 clients any favors by saying I'm going to take their case when I'm not going to be able to pay any attention. I'm just hurting the organization. And you just have to kind of have a strength of will to follow through with some things that are very hard to combat the orthodoxy and complacency that you yourself have been part of. And then institute new practices, share the knowledge amongst everybody, give some hard limits, get everybody bought into a vision of what you want your work to do, and then kind of go from there. That's as best as I can do, I think, in a sort of 30 or 60 seconds that we have.
Exactly. Well, that's a good segue for me to remind everyone that if everyone who registered for today's Hangout will get a follow-up email within the next few days, and that will have a link to the article, but you can go ahead and find it now at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. You'll also get a link to today's recording of this event. That actually does it for our time today. I want to thank Lee, thanks for joining us and for your 25 years with Legal Aid in Arkansas.
Thank you.
And Kevin, thank you for your great work on Medicaid. It's some impressive stuff.
Thank you so much, Ms.
And Jason, thanks for taking the the big challenge of improving things for tenants in Arkansas.
Oh, no problem. I've enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone for watching.
Great. Well, before we go, I want to thank all of you for watching us today, and I want to remind you that we will be back next month. And in the meantime, you can read Alchemizing Volume, there are my guest article. You can join our mailing list at povertylaw.org/join, and you can follow the Shriver Center on LinkedIn. I want to invite you to next month's Hangout. You'll get more details in your follow-up email about this, the date and time, but I'll go ahead and make a plug that it's going to be about hacking for justice. Almost sounds violent, but it's actually a great thing. It's about legal aid and tech collaborations, and we're going to have some folks from Washington State talk about how the legal aid programs there have collaborated with the tech industry to come up with innovative apps and some other tech solutions for access to justice. So that should be a really interesting conversation. Until then, remember that you're not alone in this work, and you have a community across the country supporting you, and I do hope that we'll see you back here next month. Thanks a lot.